Story 1. Shadow in the Entrance.
Living on the 8th floor had its perks. The view was decent, the neighbors were quiet, and the morning walks down the stairs were a good way to wake up. I'd gotten into the habit of leaving early, just before dawn, when the city was still cloaked in shadows and the building was silent. The stairwell was always dimly lit, the kind of dimness where the edges of things blur and shadows stretch longer than they should. It never bothered me before, until now. It started a few days ago. I was descending the stairs, my mind foggy with sleep, when I noticed it. A shadow on the wall just ahead of me, near the landing on the 7th floor. His body was as unusually apart from the rest of the body as might be expected. It looked like a person, hunched slightly, as if leaning against the wall. My first thought was that someone was smoking. A neighbor, maybe, taking a break before heading off to work. But there was no sound. No faint cough or rustle of clothes. Just the shadow. I paused, my hand tightening on the railing, and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" The shadow didn't move. I felt a flicker of unease but shrugged it off. Maybe I was imagining things, or maybe whoever it was didn't feel like chatting. I continued down the stairs, my footsteps echoing hollowly in the empty stairwell. But when I reached the 6th floor, the shadow was there again. This time it was closer, sharper, as though the light had shifted to illuminate it better. It stretched across the wall at an odd angle, too long, too distorted. "Hey!" I stopped again, my heart beating faster. I leaned over the railing, trying to peer around the corner. But the stairs below were empty. No one was there. I hurried down the next flight, my pulse quickening with each step. When I reached the 5th floor, I glanced back. The shadow was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But when I reached the lobby, the uneasy feeling hadn't left. "I'm not going to bother with the stuff," the older man said. As I pushed open the heavy door to leave, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, coming from the stairwell behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone hurrying down after me. But the stairs were empty. The shadows clung to the walls like dark stains, and the air felt colder than it should have. And then I saw it. The shadow was moving. The shadow shouldn't have moved. Shadows don't move on their own. They follow the light, stretch, and bend with the angle of the source. But this one, this shadow, dragged itself across the wall as though it were alive. Froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. It was slow, deliberate, moving up the wall like it was climbing. Even though there was no one there to cast it, the rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave, to walk out into the early morning chill and never look back. But something held me in place. Curiosity, maybe. Or fear. "Who's there?" I called again, my voice cracking. The shadows stopped. For a moment, the stairwell was completely silent, the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of your own heartbeat. I took a cautious step back, my hand still on the door handle, and then the shadow moved again. He sat up. This time it jerked fast and erratic, darting down the wall toward me. My breath hitched, and before I could think, I bolted out the door, the heavy metal slamming shut behind me. It sounded like a woman's scream. The cool air hit my face like a slap, but it did little to calm my racing heart. I stood there on the empty sidewalk, staring at the closed door, waiting for it to open, for someone, or something, to follow me out. But the door remained shut. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe there was someone there, a neighbor taking a shortcut up the stairs or playing some sort of prank. Or maybe it was a trick of the light, shadows cast by passing cars, or the flicker of the old stairwell bulb. Oh, but the next morning it happened again. I was more cautious this time, my ears straining for any sound as I descended the stairs. The faint hum of the building's old pipes, the creak of my footsteps on the concrete steps. Normal noises that should have been comforting, or things that should have been comforting. But on the 6th floor, the shadow was waiting. This time it wasn't still. It shifted faintly, like someone was pacing just out of view. I stopped mid-step, gripping the railing tightly. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at it. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice firmer than I felt. Howling. The shadow froze, and then, slowly, it turned toward me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me down the stairs 2 at a time. The air felt heavier, colder, as though the stairwell was closing in around me. A series of internal beeps marked my progress as the 3 customers walked carefully to the cart, then closed the door a step away. By the time I reached the lobby, I was gasping for breath. I burst through the door, desperate to feel the safety of the outside world. But the shadow was faster. It was already there, stretched across the wall beside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The shadow shifting, following, moving with a purpose I couldn't understand. I left the light on, but it didn't help. The shadows in the corners of the room felt deeper, darker, as if they were watching. The next morning, I debated taking the elevator instead of the stairs. But something about the enclosed space of the old, creaky lift made my stomach turn. The stairs, at least, felt open, even if they weren't safe. I left my apartment cautiously, glancing around the landing before stepping into the stairwell. It was empty, the faint glow of the overhead light casting normal shadows on the walls. But as I descended, the feeling of being watched returned. On the 7th floor, I saw it again. The shadow was there, but this time, it wasn't pacing or shifting. It stood perfectly still in the corner, hunched and distorted. I gripped the railing, my knees weak. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The shadow tilted, its edges stretching unnaturally, as though it were trying to lean closer. And then it moved. Not down the stairs, not across the wall. It moved toward me. I didn't take the stairs again for a few days. The thought of walking into that dim, suffocating stairwell sent chills through me. Instead, I took the elevator, holding my breath each time the old metal box groaned and jolted between floors. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid it, the shadow didn't leave me. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the power went out, and I noticed it was sudden. One moment I was scrolling through my phone, and the next the room was plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The faint glow of the streetlights outside vanished behind the curtains. But this quick session happened to everyone, pounding in front of my ears and annulling the noise, and finally turning to overwhelming misery. I fumbled for a flashlight, my hands shaking, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the clutter of my living room. Everything looked normal. Until I noticed the corner. The shadow was there, stretched unnaturally up the wall, its edges flickering like smoke. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was moving, shifting, expanding and contracting like it was breathing. The flashlight beam trembled as I pointed it at the shadow, but the light didn't dispel it. Instead, the shadow seemed to writhe, almost angry, the edges stretching toward me. "Get out," I whispered, backing toward the door. The shadow surged forward. I ran. The stairwell felt like my only escape. I didn't trust the elevator. Didn't trust being trapped in that small metal box with nowhere to run. But as soon as I opened the stairwell door, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was thick, heavy with a damp, musty smell that clung to my lungs. The light overhead flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows that danced across the walls. I took a hesitant step forward, gripping the railing tightly. My footsteps echoed loudly, too loudly, as though the stairwell was amplifying every sound. And then I heard it. Breathing. Was it mine? The sound was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But as I descended, it grew louder, ragged, wet, and coming from below. On the 6th floor, I froze. The shadow was there, waiting, stretched across the wall in that same distorted shape. But this time it wasn't alone. There was another shadow beside it. And another. They moved in unison, shifting and writhing, their forms blurring together like ink in water. The breathing grew louder, filling the stairwell, and I realized with a jolt that the sound was coming from them. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing. The shadows didn't stop. They moved closer, crawling up the walls, their dark forms twisting and elongating. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled down the stairs, the shadows following me, their breathing growing heavier, angrier. By the time I reached the ground floor, I was gasping for breath. I burst through the stairwell door, collapsing onto the cold lobby floor. For a moment, everything was silent, and then I saw it. The shadow wasn't in the stairwell anymore. It was behind me. The shadow behind me stretched across the polished lobby floor, jagged and unnatural, like shattered glass. It moved even though nothing cast it, sliding closer with an impossible, silent purpose. My chest tightened as I scrambled to my feet, backing away toward the exit. The glass doors of the building were just a few steps away, the pale glow of the streetlights beyond promising safety. But the shadow didn't let me go. It rose slowly, peeling itself off the floor, its edges rippling like fire. As it stood upright, its form twisted and stretched, vaguely human, but wrong in every possible way. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. And those hollow spaces where eyes should have been, they stared at me, empty and endless. "Stay away!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The shadow didn't stop. It took a step forward, then another, and as it moved, the lights in the lobby flickered and dimmed. I could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into my skin, into my bones. The glass door was right there, but my legs wouldn't move, drooling the worlds like a drapery over a high fence. "Why are you following me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The shadow tilted its head further, its jagged form twisting unnaturally. When it spoke, the voice didn't come from its form, but from all around me. Deep and guttural. "You saw me." The lights flickered one last time and then went out completely, plunging the lobby into total darkness. My breathing was the only sound, shallow and rapid, until I heard it, the echo of footsteps on the tile. I raised my phone, its weak screen illuminating the space in front of me. The shadow wasn't alone anymore. There were dozens of them now, stretching and writhing along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Their movements were erratic, disjointed, but they all turned toward me in unison, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. "You looked," they said in that same fractured voice, overlapping and echoing. "You saw. Now you belong to us." "Oh," I screamed, stumbling backward. I didn't mean to." The shadows surged forward, faster than I could react. They wrapped around me like tendrils of smoke, cold and suffocating, dragging me down. And then the shadows exploded, wiping me out with a violence that drove. My vision blurred as I struggled, their voices filling my head, each word driving deeper into my mind. "You belong here. You belong to us." The last thing I saw was my own shadow, stretched against the wall, standing perfectly still as the others moved. But it wasn't mine anymore. It was watching me. The stairwell is silent now. The new tenant on the 8th floor says the building feels cold, like it's holding its breath. They don't take the stairs much, but when they do, they swear they hear footsteps behind them. Sometimes they catch a glimpse of something. A shadow just ahead, moving when it shouldn't. But they never look too long.
Story 2. The wrong name. Working at the post office is monotonous at best. Sorting mail, scanning barcodes, and handing packages to grumpy customers. It's the kind of job that makes days blur together. Until that day. It was near the end of my shift when I noticed the letter. At first, it seemed ordinary. A plain white envelope with neat handwriting on the front. But something about it caught my attention. A term crossing out the capital word. It had my last name. I frowned, picking it up for a closer look. The address was unfamiliar, and the first name wasn't mine. David. Now things slowed down as I read on the note. I turned back the page. The curiosity was fleeting. Mistakes happen all the time, especially with common surnames. I tossed it into the hold for pickup bin and forgot about it. But that night, as I lay in bed, the letter crept back into my thoughts. Something about the handwriting, the precision of it, felt wrong. The next day it was still there, untouched in the bin. I decided to open it. I know it's against the rules, but something about the letter tugged at me, like it was waiting for me to see it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no return address, no markings, just 4 words scrawled in the same neat handwriting. This is no mistake. My stomach churned as I stared at the note. I flipped the paper over, hoping for more, but it was blank. What did it mean? And who was this David? Letters arrived. More letters arrived. They were all addressed to different people. First names I didn't recognize, but every one of them bore my last name. Some were handwritten, others typed, but they all had the same unsettling precision. For response, Farrell filled the pen, handed a piece of paper to Rudy, and told Rudy to read. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I sat in the back office. A small pile of these letters in front of me. I opened them one by one, each note more cryptic than the last. You're not supposed to be here. We know your name. It's almost time, Lieutenant Colonel said. The final letter made my hands tremble. It was addressed to me. The handwriting was identical to the others, but this time, the signature at the bottom was mine. I hadn't written it. The letter with my signature stared back at me, its message seared into my mind. You're almost ready. Off screen, Eddie hugs his daughter closer and casts a prayer over. I couldn't take my eyes off the signature. It was flawless, an exact match to the way I signed every document, every receipt. But I hadn't written it. I knew I hadn't. My pulse raced as I flipped the paper over, desperate for more answers. But the back was blank. The envelope was unremarkable, just plain white paper with no return address. Only the labels on the back illuminated the contents. It just opened on the catch rolls. Let's forget anything went all wrong there. Who sent this? I whispered to the empty room. The shadows in the back office seemed to stretch, pressing in on me, and for the first time, I felt truly watched. The next morning, I arrived early to check the mail before anyone else. My heart sank as I saw the pile of new letters waiting in the sorting bin. All of them were addressed to people I didn't know, but every one bore my last name. And then I saw it. At the very bottom of the pile was another letter addressed to me. My hands shook as I picked it up, the envelope heavier than the others. Inside was a photograph. It showed me, standing behind the counter at work. But it wasn't taken from the security cameras. The angle was wrong. It was closer, too close, as if the photographer had been standing right there, watching me. Written on the back of the photo were 3 words. Do you remember? I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. The photograph burned in my pocket, its weight growing heavier with every passing hour. The letters kept coming, piling up faster than I could sort them. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, my nerves stretched thin. I stayed late to go through the letters again, hoping to find something, anything that made sense. That's when I heard the knock. It was soft, deliberate, coming from the locked door of the back office. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. And then I saw it. A letter slid under the door, the envelope pristine and crisp. My name was scrawled on the front, in that same hauntingly precise handwriting. With shaking hands, I picked it up and tore it open. The note inside was simple. "Open the door." I stared at the note, the words, "Open the door," blurring as my vision swam with fear. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the door on its hinges. My breath hitched, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Don't open it," my mind screamed. Every instinct told me to stay put, to bolt from the room and never look back. But something deeper, something darker, pulled me toward the door. The knock came again, slower now, deliberate. With trembling hands, I unlocked the latch and pulled the door open. No one was there. The hallway was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. But just as I began to step back inside, I saw it. Don't see what anyone might mean by it. It lay on the floor just beyond the threshold, perfectly placed. My name was written on the envelope in the same precise handwriting. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a question scrawled across it. "You remember now?" "Do you remember now?" Halsey shrugged. There was more to it than that. Halsey finally spoke in a low voice. The air around me grew colder, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly as the shadows in the hallway seemed to shift, twisting and stretching toward me. "Who's doing this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The answer came not in words, but in movement. At the far end of the hallway, a figure emerged. It was hard to make out at first, its shape obscured by the flickering lights, but as it drew closer, its features became clearer. It was me. The figure was an exact copy. Same face, same clothes, even the same hesitant step I had taken just moments ago. But its eyes were wrong. They were hollow, dark voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. "Do you remember?" it asked, its voice layered and fractured, like multiple versions of me speaking at once. I stumbled back, clutching the letter. What are you?" The figure tilted its head, its lips twisting into a distorted smile. "I'm what's left of you," it said. "The part you forgot." The figure stepped closer, its movements unnaturally smooth. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. "You've been writing these letters," it said, its voice echoing inside my head. "No," I stammered, shaking my head. "That's not possible. I didn't write anything." The figure chuckled, a low guttural sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "Not now," it said, "but before you forgot who you are." London. I backed away, my legs trembling. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in, the shadows crawling toward me. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. It stopped just inches from me, its void-like eyes locking onto mine. The walls around me shimmered, the space twisting and warping. Images flashed through my mind, snippets of memories that didn't feel like mine. A hand signing a name on a letter, a door opening to an empty house, a figure standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. The letters, the names, they weren't random. They were victims. My victims. Me. The truth hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in guilt and terror. No, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. That's not me. I didn't. Hieroglyphics and human artistry collide. Harrigan's cut stuttered back to life, the visuals loaded with horror. Then cameras flattered. You did, the figure said, its grin widening. And now, they're coming for you. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around my legs, pulling me down. My screams echoed through the hallway as the void consumed me, the figure's laughter ringing in my ears. Jal leveled his magic at me, his eyes whitewashed when he spotted mine. When the morning shift arrived at the post office, they found the back office empty. The desk was covered in letters, each addressed to someone who had gone missing over the years. But one letter stood out. It was addressed to me. Inside was a single line. Welcome back.